Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, after this wonderful build-up by Dr. John Duke Anthony, everything is going to go downhill from now on. It's a pleasure to be back at this wonderful conference and to meet with such wonderful people as yourselves. The food was delicious, and I appreciated it very much, and John Duke Anthony gave me time to partake of it. 7 years ago, President Barack Obama delivered a historic speech at Cairo University, telling Arabs and Muslims that, and I quote, "So long as our relationship is defined by our differences, we will empower those who sow hatred rather than peace, those who promote conflict rather than cooperation, that can help all of our people achieve justice and prosperity. And this cycle of suspicion and discord must end." End of quote. After 7 years, the Arab-Israeli conflict is at a standstill. Al-Qaeda's terrorism has been replaced by the so-called ISIS terrorism. And ladies and gentlemen, I prefer to call them fahish, as I mentioned last year, meaning obscene, rather than Daesh or ISIS. The situations in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Libya, and Yemen are in shambles. Iranian regional bullying is shamelessly escalating. More devastating to these relationships is the legislation just passed by Congress known as Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act. The implications and unintended consequences of so-called JASTA are broad and far-reaching. To amend the basis of sovereign immunity, the US Congress has taken steps that will bring significant harm to the international system. Most members of the international community, including the EU, the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the Arab League, and the Gulf Cooperation Council, oppose JASTA because of its consequences on the principle of sovereign immunity. Over 15 countries have voiced their concern or signaled their intent to pass similar reciprocal measures. Given the presence that the US has worldwide, such reciprocal measures will most likely affect US interests, including the fate of servicemen and women and diplomats. The widely accepted principle of sovereign immunity has governed the international community for centuries. Without sovereign immunity, no country, including the United States, can conduct its affairs effectively. The Obama administration and the US State Department understand the damage of JASTA and that it would bring to international order. And that is why the President vetoed it. It is also why the President, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Director of National Intelligence have all expressed their concerns and opposition to it. If the principle of foreign sovereign immunity is threatened, investor confidence in the US economy will naturally be reduced. It will certainly have a detrimental effect on the bilateral relations and the ongoing cooperation between the United States has with its closest allies, including cooperation in countering terrorism. Through the decades of its experience, Saudi Arabia has been a responsible actor on the world stage and confident of its behavior for justice and for all victims of terrorist acts. However, it is not surprising nowadays to target Saudi Arabia with accusations that are far from the truth. Suspecting Saudi Arabia's genuine and active combat against terrorism in certain quarters in the United States is playing into the hands of forces aiming to destroy our mutual beneficiary strategic historical relationship. I can imagine bin Laden raising his arms in his graves and saying, "Thank you." The game of delegitimizing countries and societies on baseless grounds is an unjust game. Terrorism is a global phenomenon. Its fight is a global fight, and therefore the blame for failure in containing this threat should be directed at all involved in such a fight. Scapegoating this failure is not the solution. Despite all efforts of counter-terrorism nationally and internationally, we are witnessing the expansion and the transformation of this threat into a global threat. If this means anything, it means the lack of a coordinated international counter-terrorism policy and failure of policies adopted so far to combat and eradicate such a deadly threat at the international level. In saying this, I am not underestimating the importance of the ongoing counter-terrorism cooperation between states, which succeeded on several occasions to avert imminent disasters. However, success in dealing with such transnational phenomena in a globalized world requires an international, globalized, multifaceted policy to tackle not only the security aspect of the phenomena, but their causes. Failure in addressing the causes of such a threat and failure in finding a common understanding of its nature and meaning will remain a stumbling block toward devising an international sustainable counterterrorism policy not subject to politicization. Unfortunately, the world has not come up with one such policy yet, and it is unlikely to come up with one in our polarized international order. Saudi Arabia was and is in the forefront of calling for such a policy. The Kingdom called for the establishment of an international counter-terrorism center where intelligence, expertise, and finances can be shared since the year 2005. Until today, and even after the United Nations established the center 8 years later, it is truly only Saudi Arabia that is financing the center, without any contributions from the rest of the world. The difficulty in achieving this is exemplified in the American and Russian attitude toward fighting terrorism in Syria and Iraq, not in Saudi Arabia's attitude. While the two countries agree that Fahish and other such groups in Syria and Iraq are terrorist organizations and pose a threat to their national security and to both regional and international peace and security, we find them differing on how to confront this danger and about the terrorist nature of these organizations and about the causes of terrorism. Russia intervened militarily in Syria under the pretext of counter-terrorism. But we find it carpet bombing innocent civilians and the Syrian moderate political and military opposition that seek political change in Syria to achieve the demands of the Syrian people, who revolted against the dictatorship in their country. Russia did not seriously fight the terrorist organizations that it claimed to fight. In fact, its intervention was to support a terrorist regime that is responsible for the genocide of 500,000 innocent Syrians, the displacement of 11 million of them, internally and externally, and the emergence and spread of terrorism in Syria. We find Russia also fighting alongside Iranian terrorist organizations and militias that are no less terrorist than Fahish and the others. The coalition bombing Fahish, of which Saudi Arabia is a party, is reluctant to take on the biggest terrorist of all, namely Bashar. and the lack of clarity and delay in providing the needed weaponry to the moderate opposition to defend against the onslaught of Bashar and his allies since the early days of its existence has allowed Fahish and Assad to wreak havoc on Syria. Russia and America, as Security Council members, bear the major responsibility in facing the threats to international peace and security. Differences between major countries over diagnosing this phenomenon are the recipe for failure of any perceived international strategy of counterterrorism. Defeating Fahish in Iraq and Syria will not eradicate the threat of terrorism and prevent the birth of new Fahishes in different shapes or forms. Unless we devise a new international strategy that deals with the causes and not the symptoms of terrorism. In Syria, ladies and gentlemen, it is Bashar al-Assad who is the biggest recruiter for Fahish. In Iraq, it is the wildly sectarian militias supported by Iran that draw the support for Fahish. The new American president has a responsibility to lead in this respect. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no more cause for suspicion and discord than the uncertainty about the world's strategic outlook toward the Middle East. The absence of clear intentions, policies, and leadership has contributed to the complexity of the situation in our region. One of the most dangerous outcomes of this prevailing uncertainty, which threatens the region and all of its nation states, is the vacuum that widens every day because of the crumbling regional order and social contracts in Arab states. Arabs, ladies and gentlemen, are to blame for that. This vacuum is responsible for unleashing all kinds of political, social, religious, sectarian forces, non-state actors, terrorist groupings, and regional and international interferences that complicate finding indigenous solutions to indigenous crises. Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Libya are the issues at hand. Therefore, all these fallouts are posing security challenges to the state, to the Arab world, and world peace and security. It is the responsibility of leading powers in the region, with the support from the world, to manage such situations to guarantee the birth of a healthy, peaceful national and regional security order. Alas, this requires a new vision and a strategic outlook. No more telling about this uncertainty than the world's inaction toward the tragic Syrian crisis that paved the way for Russia to regain aggressively its prominence in the region and for Iran to boast about its control of 4 Arab capitals. It opened the door for a new geopolitical landscape that is not in the interest of regional security and stability, or for the interest of Arab and American. Iran's nuclear deal has not led to the expected result of rationalizing Iranian behavior in the region. In fact, it has increased the Iranian appetite for more bullying in the region. The new president must continue to provide the leadership to bring peace and security to the region. The next US president will find all the help from the region. Trust building between the USA and Saudi Arabia and its sister states in the GCC should be tackled and invigorated by the next president. Ladies and gentlemen, continued failure in addressing the issue of the Arab-Israeli conflict has been and will continue to be the bone of contention between the Arab world and all American administrations. if the experience of the past and present American administrations in attempting to find a just solution to this protracted conflict has revealed anything, it is that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will remain intractable if US policy is unduly beholden to Israel's positions. The game of Israeli favoritism has not proven wise for the US or for us. And in an ever-changing world, it will be an even greater folly. Regardless of the uncertainty looming in the Middle East, the Arab and Muslim peoples will always be there. Time will prove wrong those who imagine that the future of Palestine will be determined by Israel. In fact, continuation of the dominant perception of an America beholden to Israel in this issue has always been the major factor in suspicion and discord with Arabs and Muslims. Solving the Palestinian and Arab-Israeli conflict is imperative to a peaceful region. And therefore, it is the hope that the new president will be bolder in addressing this important issue. The Arab world has presented its plan, the Arab Peace Initiative, since 2002. And it is time for the United States and Israel to take it seriously, if they desire a peaceful region and good relations with the Arab and Muslim worlds. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, without a sound leadership provided by the next American president, the whole world, not only the Middle East, will slide toward more tensions and confrontations. Before we congratulate ourselves and pat our backs on failures, I humbly suggest that the new president, even before taking the oath of office, journey to the Middle East and meet with America's traditional allies and get a first-hand feel for the area and its people before listening to the advice of so-called experts who traditionally have promoted agendas that have not served the cause of peace. There is hope for a different course with the newcomer to the White House. Thank you.